Hey guys, my name is Mariah. I'm a rotational physiotherapist, currently trying to find a Band 6 specialist role, and so far I've applied to, well, not even so far, recently I've applied to 3 jobs, and I'm hopeful that at least one will land in the interview. So with that hopefulness, I've been prepping for interviews, going through questions using the STARR model. I've been doing that most of this morning, so I thought maybe we could do like 2 questions together. For those of you that don't know what the STARR model is, so I've got my whiteboard here, so I can do it there. Those of you that don't know what the STARR model is, it's an acronym for situation, so situation, task, action, results, and reflection. And those are typically the way that people would recommend that you answer your questions in interviews. And sometimes certain interviews will prompt you to answer using the STARR method anyway. So I'm just going through like generic questions that are most likely going to come up in senior interviews based on interviews I've had before, and really like not rehearsing my answer necessarily, because nothing's worse than having an interview and it sounds like I'm just repeating things like a robot, but just helping myself generate examples that would fit the narrative of the specific question that I'm being asked. So then if questions along those lines get asked, I'm not here like, I'm not sure how I can fit this in. Like a quick example before we get into the 2 that I would like to go through with you guys. So earlier I completed one that was like, let me do this one. Tell me about a time when you received positive feedback from a patient. Now, you could think that's pretty easy. Sometimes I will just go off on a tangent with these types of questions, but by using the STARR model, it keeps things pretty structured. So as for situation, I said I was presented with a patient who had like an MSK condition. I'm not going to specify because it would be too specifically obvious who I'm referring to. But I had a patient with an MSK condition who had been through physio before, and they just didn't have any resolution to their condition. My task at hand was to complete my subjective and objective assessment to then provide the appropriate intervention for them. My actions were that I completed my assessment, reduced the exercises that they were issued with, and I was holistic in my approach. The results were that I received positive feedback. The actions were appreciated by the patient, and that the exercises were effective. Now, in terms of in reflection, I reflected to say that like it improved my confidence in my own MSK abilities based off the feedback that I received. In future, when I get positive feedback, maybe I'll ask if patient could put it in a formal channel, like formally report their feedback and record their feedback, just so I have something tangible rather than like word of mouth, just more for like a CPD backing myself up type of thing. I've said that another thing in regards to just like general treatment of the patient, I would continue being holistic, because with this patient it wasn't necessarily all the treatment I provided wasn't necessarily just the hands-on stuff I did. It was like just general advice as well, like talking about just life, other aspects of life, yellow flags, etc., that may have contributed to their condition. Anyway, so we've got these 2 other questions here. Let me just lock my laptop. There we go. So the next 2 questions, I've chosen them because I was like, they are most likely going to come up not even just for like senior roles, but also for junior roles, so there's something that can relate to the rest of you too. So the first question is, you sought support when you were unable to do something. So it'd be, please tell me about a time when you sought support when you were unable to do something. Now, this is cool. I've already thought of my example for this. So my situation was, again, an MSK condition I had. I wasn't necessarily that comfortable with leading on the patient in terms of I didn't know if what I was doing was absolutely correct because I wasn't seeing the results I was expecting. So my situation would be MSK, patient, not achieving full ROM or following, I can't remember how many sessions, to say 3 sessions. My task at hand would be to regain, would be that I would want to regain full ROM, in joint, and now the actions I took have to obviously relate back to when I sought the feedback, well, sought support, sorry, because I was unable to do something. So my actions were that I discussed it with colleagues who are more experienced, and that I did some independent research. So looking online to help myself figure out what I could do next. And I even got a colleague to come into the room to look at the patient after, well, with me, essentially. So, colleague hands-on review. The results were that I learned that the presentation is normal. Okay. The presentation. And then that, as a result, me learning that that was normal presentation, not only calmed my nerves and like stress about everything, it also helped reassure the patients. Reduce stress and increase patient reassurance. Now, in reflection, what would I have done differently in this situation when it came to sorting feedback? I potentially would have asked for support sooner. So, support sooner. I was honest with the patient the whole time that I'm not that familiar with this condition. I know some people would say that it's probably best not to be like, I'm not familiar with this and that, but I would rather be honest and say, like, I will look into this for you. I'm going to speak to one of my colleagues just because I'm unsure about the presentation based off the amount of experience I have in comparison to them. But I'll be back and I'll get an answer for you. And the patient did like that, so I would do that again moving forward. Remain honest as a reflection about abilities, but also remain open, because I was open to the support and I was open to support and other suggestions. So that's the first question. In terms of when you would word it in an interview, I wouldn't necessarily go, okay, situation this, task that, this, that, but the way I would word it. So again, just to reiterate the question, the first question is, please tell me about a time when you sought feedback when you were unable to do something. I would say, so there was a time when I was on my MSK rotation that had a patient presenting with said injury, and after a few sessions I noticed that we weren't regaining the range of movement that I was expecting to regain within that time. So I decided, because at that point I've already said task as well, so I decided it was best to speak to my colleagues who have more experience than myself. I discussed it with them, I allowed them to show me other techniques of what I could do to potentially gain that additional range of motion that I was missing. And when I realised in the moment that maybe my technique wasn't correct based off what they taught me, or I wasn't that comfortable based off what I had been given in terms of the support, I then got another colleague with more experience than myself to sit in and review the patient themselves as well, but also observe what I was doing, both to help with my learning, but also to help with the patient's reassurance. I did inform the patient that I was going to seek the support as well, just to remain honest. And looking back on things, I would definitely seek out that support again. I think it was good for me, both myself and the patient, that I had someone watching, like shadowing me for that session, and to reassure the both of us that it was completely normal, the presentation that we were observing. But on the other side as well, not even but, so on the other side as well, I would say I would remain flexible and open to other people's opinions in my journey of support. Boom. Something along those lines, I would say, in an interview. Now, I'm just clearing the bottom of the board for the other question. So the next question we have is, please tell me of a time when you advocated for a patient. So the example I've chosen to use is a situation where you've probably all faced this. You get a patient out, but then the staff on the ward's like, can you get the patient back, because it's a bit inconvenient for them to be out. So situation, patient, transfer completed. Patient off baseline. I'm ready to ask for patient to return to bed. And in terms of tasks, so my task would have been to assess patient transfers, the action of that. So yeah, my task, so the situation was that I had a patient who needed a transfer assessment, patient's off their baseline, MDT asked for the patient to be returned straight back to bed after I'd completed my assessment. My task going over there was, you could argue that the task was to then advocate for the patient, but in my opinion, I think me advocating for the patient was a result of the task. But anyway, so task, I'm putting assess the patient's transfers. My action was transfer assessed. And then I'd put in actions advocated for patient remaining out of bed. And then due to deconditioning. And in terms of the results, the result of it was that patient remained out of bed. I explained to MDT why necessary. And in reflection, I would say, obviously continue to advocate for patient. Not in a rude way, but I would also say educating other members of the MDT as to why it's beneficial. Why? Come to a resolution with colleague. Anyway, I can go a lot further into that. But essentially, so reminder, the question is, please tell me about a time when you advocate for a patient or a colleague. Now, for myself, I always find it easier to talk about a time when I advocate for a patient, just because I would have an abundance of examples versus times when I've advocated for colleagues. Anyway, so my situation is that I had a patient who I did and I had a patient completed their transfer assessment and they were off their baseline, but I was requested by one of the colleagues if I could get the patient back, just because it wasn't, I don't want to say an inconvenience, but it was just it wasn't the best time for the patient to be out just based off other factors. That's all I would say. And then my task at hand at that point in time was, one, to obviously have completed my assessment, but two, to explain as to why it was beneficial for said patient to be sat out at that period of time. The actions I took were that, obviously, I completed my assessment. I realised that the patient is off their baseline. I advocated for my patient by expressing to my colleague that I understand the factors that you're sharing and I'm not discrediting them. I understand that it's a bit of a, it's a bit, I don't like the word inconvenience, but like, it's not ideal that I've got the patient out right now, but that's for your benefit. But for the patient's benefit, it is ideal that they're sat out right now. The patient's already deconditioned, they're off their baseline. The longer they sit in bed, the worse that they would get. It's not fair. It's not fair for the patient. So what I did, beyond advocating for the patient and then explaining this to my colleague, we came to a middle ground. I explained to the colleague that, again, I understand your situation. You have to also understand where we're coming from. We're coming from the side of this will benefit the patient, not just the staff as well. The longer the patient stays in the bed, the longer the hospital stay, etc. And in the end, the reasoning was that, the conclusion was that, okay, I'll put my hands up, patient can sit out for their lunch break, like the lunch period, and then that's about, an hour and a half of the period that the patient was going to be set out. I will come straight back from my lunch and put the patient back into bed, but as long as they're left out for this period of time, unless there's a good reason for them to go back to bed. Now, that was where we concluded. So, as you can see from those type of questions, I'm hoping those examples weren't confusing for you, but I'm really trying to focus on my STARR model approach to answering questions, because I find in the moment those ones usually throw me off a little bit. But yeah, I'm really hopeful that one of these 3 roles that I've applied for turn into an interview and that we'll have some success. But in the meantime, it's good to keep sharp, remember these examples. While sitting here, I want to see, there's so many things that I completely forgot that I've done that these have drawn out of me. Another thing before we wrap up this video, another task that I have done recently is, let me bring it up here. So I made a table. I'm not going to show you the table on here because it's got too much information on it. But anyway, I created a table based off some bits of paperwork I looked at, some feedback I received and everything. And essentially on the table, I've got a box for values in terms of who am I. And in there I've written that, like, I'm approachable, I'm determined, I'm energetic, I'm self-aware, etc. And then in the next box, I've got what have I done? So that's my experiences, and I've listed my core experiences. So you got that I complete this comment, that I do some volunteering, that I help with some planning. I've also got some personal things about who I am and what I've done as well. So I've got that I do YouTube, that I like to travel, that I'm on-call competent. There we go. And then in the next part of the table, I have competencies. What am I capable of? So I'm capable of teamwork, verbal and non-verbal communication, on-call competent, building a rapport with patient and families, things along that line. And lastly, I've got what do I know? So for the what do I know, because I rotate things that I know, I just thought it'd be best to list them specifically to the rotation. So I've got, like, I know about onward referral options, so I've listed all of the options of onward referrals. I know what it takes to be a band 5 versus being a band 6. For each rotation, I've listed out, like, I know about these conditions, discharge planning, I know about, these interventions, I know about positioning charts, I know about femur fractures, I know about, your MSK protocols and things along those lines. And when I was doing this task, it really made me think, wow, like I know I kind of touched on it, I did touch on it in my other video where I was talking about like a self-audit, but like doing things like this really make you remember how much you've like learned along the way. Because I've been qualified for 3 years and I've learned a lot in my 3 years. I've done a lot in my 3 years. And in moments like this where I'm like really trying to progress, it's easy for me to get in a slump and completely forget all the things that I've done. It's easy for me to be hard on myself. It's easy for me to be like, well, last interviews I was not successful, but you know, so what's the chance of me being successful this time? It's really competitive already. It's easy for me to put myself down, and I'm really trying to get out of that rut. Yeah, I think I'm on the right path. I have my days where I slip right back into my rut and I'm very frustrated with life and everything and career wise right now, as like many of you probably are as well. This isn't the position you envisioned yourself to be in at this point in time, so things can be quite frustrating, but we move along and we will be up and going, and I will update you guys on if I am successful in getting an interview or anything along those lines. Fingers crossed me. Prayers, 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 please. Anyway, I will see you guys in another video. Bye guys.